Welcome to the pharmaphorum podcast. This is web editor Nicole Raleigh, and today I'll be speaking with Dr. Ramy Younes, who is Corporate Vice President, Global Head of Clinical Development, Cardio-Renal-Metabolism at Boehringer Ingelheim. Welcome, Ramy.
Welcome, Nicole.
So today we're going to be exploring the crisis beyond obesity that many clinicians and health systems are now grappling with, and that is that obesity can't be treated as a short-term weight loss lifestyle issue. Rather, it needs to be managed as a complex, chronic, multi-organ disease. But before we sink our teeth into that central topic, Ramy, I was wondering if you could briefly introduce yourself for listeners and provide a little insight about the journey that led you to today.
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you for the invitation today. I think it's very, very important that we take the time to talk about obesity and the interconnected conditions. It's a topic that is very actual, and I think due to the prevalence of these conditions, you could find everyone who is affected or have someone who is affected of his knowledge. And personally, I can say that I have many family members who are also in these conditions, and very, very close to me, my mom herself, who underwent bariatric surgery years ago. And I have the experience in-house on how this can affect people, not just who are willing to lose weight, but also who are willing to improve their life. So this what reinforced me to work in this space. And as a practicing physician, I made this as a mission to help patients in these conditions and also developing drugs that can go in that direction. So thank you for having me and for bringing this topic.
A pleasure to have you on the podcast today, Ramy, and thank you for sharing that personal background to your career. So, turning to obesity now, it sits at the center of, as you say, interconnected cardio-renal-metabolic or CRM conditions, where outcomes often hinge on shared drivers, especially under-recognized or silent liver disease. Indeed, liver disease is often missed in cardiometabolic risk and is referred to as the liver blind spot. So I was wondering if you could tell us what problems this creates, Ramy.
Obesity is a disease which is not just about weight. It sits at the very center of the CRM diseases, as you just rightly mentioned. And going back to my clinical practice, I can say that more than 90% of the patients that I used to see, they did not have obesity in isolation. They present themselves with obesity and another chronic disease in the cardiovascular renal metabolic space. So obesity, we can see this as something which inflicts a systemic damage and silently, most of the time, harm organs. And this is damage is rarely isolated. And one of the key organs that is damaged by obesity is the liver. And we can consider the liver as one of the engine of metabolic health because the liver is regulating metabolism, blood sugar, cholesterol. And with obesity, the excess fat in the liver, it really triggers inflammation and damage, which then, if undetected, can have a domino effects on other CRM conditions. So it's very important that we look at patients with obesity. We have a holistic approach and look at the patient in totality.
Absolutely. I like this notion of the domino effect that you mentioned a minute ago, which is very important when we're talking about the CRM space. So can you give us any other similar examples? We've just sort of discussed liver briefly. Can you provide details on any other organ complications in that similar respect?
Yeah, so the liver is a stark example of a silent CRM condition, but of course the cardiovascular space and the cardiovascular disease is equally underappreciated in its connection to obesity, and unfortunately, the vast majority of patients that also I used to see in my practice, they have any kind of cardiovascular disease, and this is normally the root cause that provoke the outcomes in the long term. Because we know that obesity can increase the cardiovascular risk because of the increase of visceral fat, insulin resistance, dyslipidemia, and all these things are connected to the cardiovascular pathways. But not just cardiovascular disease. If you think about all these triggers, they can affect another key organ like the kidney, for example. And we know that there is a connection between kidney, heart, and the cardiovascular system. And this is why we at Boehringer Ingelheim have basically built a CRM strategy that can address these diseases, considering them all together rather than in silos.
Thank you, Ramy. So, can we tunnel into that and talk about these mechanisms, these triggers, and how the heart, kidney, liver, metabolic disease increasingly cluster? I think is going to be the key word here, and even amplify each other, and also speak also to BI's or apologize, Boehringer Ingelheim's strategy when it comes to CRM.
Yes. So I think we are just at the beginning of our understanding of how the CRM disease work. And the way I like to see the CRM space is more as an orchestra where with many instruments playing together. And if you have an instrument that goes out of tune, basically it affects the whole performance. And this is basically what happens in CRM as well. So let's start with the connection between the liver and the heart or the kidney, for example. And we know that the excess fat in the liver can increase insulin resistance, elevate blood glucose and triglycerides, increase the cardiovascular risk, and also lead to inflammation. And this can accelerate atherosclerosis, for example. And this is a huge connection between the liver asset and the cardiovascular asset. But also, when the heart starts reducing its output, it then affects another important organ like the kidney. And here you see how this interconnection is maintained and reinforced, basically. But not just this, the visceral fat itself is a metabolically active fat and pro-inflammatory, which then can contribute to the other factors that I mentioned before. So in this case, it's very important then when we design our strategies, and this is what also we do at Boehringer Ingelheim, we can think of therapies that can tackle the multiple aspects of these conditions.
Thank you. So let's segue to consideration of care now and tackling all this. So it's been much discussed how siloed care is failing. So my question is, what can integrated pathways do to improve outcomes and ease system pressure? In particular, of course, when it comes to our discussion today, the CRM space.
And this is a great question. So, industry and partners need to come together to tackle obesity and CRM diseases. Let's talk about some numbers. In the next decades, the number of people living with obesity are projected to be nearly 2 billion. And by 2035, basically the economic impact of obesity is nearly $4.3 trillion, which is basically nearly 3% of the global GDP. And this is only on the obesity side. If you look at the liver side, for example, with MASH, which is the more advanced form of liver disease, here we are talking about something which will be the leading cause of liver transplantation, liver failure, liver cancer. So alone, industry will not go anywhere without partnerships. And here is where, for example, at Boehringer Ingelheim, we are working to really transform how disease like obesity and MASH can be treated worldwide. And we are partnering with advocates such as, the World Obesity Federation or the Global Liver Institute for the liver side for having better obesity and metabolic health for years. We also trying to tackle another issue, which is the early diagnosis of conditions like MASH and fatty liver disease. And this is where we are working with global partnerships with EcoSense, for example. And the bottom line here for me is that to truly tackle obesity, we need an integrated approach working together with partners across industry, but also research and healthcare.
Thank you, Ramy. So I was wondering, given everything we've been discussing today, how is and how can the field move towards approaches that address shared biology across, as you say, weight and organ health, but not just weight alone? How can this be done tangibly and meaningfully?
So, Boehringer Ingelheim has long believed that obesity is a complex chronic disease where weight loss is only one part of the solution. And we are currently seeing this and the benefits that patients in our clinical trials have currently benefiting. For example, in our survodutide program, which is our dual GLP-1 glucagon agonist in phase 2, we have seen that across our programs, people living with obesity improve their body weight by nearly 19%. And at the same time, they had a great improvement in liver fat, with nearly 83% of the patients having improvement of liver fat, and nearly 64.5% of the patients having improvement in fibrosis, which is the scarring in the liver that can lead to liver outcomes. And why is this important? Because with these new therapeutic approaches, we want to say that we don't want just our patients eat less, but we want also something in the mechanism of action like the glucagon that in this case will tell the liver do more. And this is what we expect from the new therapies. And we are currently testing survodutide in a huge phase 3 program, which is called the Synchronize program. And this is going across multiple patient population, people living with obesity with and without type 2 diabetes, but also people living with obesity and established cardiovascular diseases, but also people living with obesity and regional differences, like, for example, in China and in Japan, where the obesity definition is different. But this is not the whole story. We have also the Leverage program, which is looking at patients living with MASH, with advanced fibrosis or cirrhosis. And this is also just the beginning, because we also would like to invest significantly in the development of next generation candidates across the broad CRM space. And we would like to find solutions that can be well tolerated by patients. So again, obesity is a chronic disease, and potential consequences of not treating it is that you have a whole involvement of the cardio-renal metabolic system, and this is what we want to tackle.
Thank you. As you say, it is a broad, a grand, a global plan, but it sounds like the first steps are very much being solidified. So I have one final question for you today, Ramy, and that is, what is your closing takeaway for our listeners?
Yeah, thank you again, Nicole. And I think it's important to underline that obesity remains a huge unmet need. And obesity need to be seen as a chronic and complex disease that affects the entire body, and needs also to be seen as a disease that influence how other cardio-renal metabolic conditions are impacted. But most of all, we need to think about the liver as the metabolic engine that can be behind the involvement of all these CRM conditions. So, new therapeutic options need to consider the liver as a key element and key driver of obesity.
Thank you, Ramy, and thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Nicole, for having me today.
And that concludes another episode of the pharmaphorum podcast. You can find more information about this episode, including a download link and information about previous installments at pharmaphorum.com/podcasts. The pharmaphorum podcast is also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, Pocket Casts, Podbean, and pretty much wherever else you download your other podcasts from. Just search for pharmaphorum and follow and hit subscribe. Of course, don't forget to visit our website itself, where you can sign up for daily and weekly news and analysis bulletins. And do follow us on Blue Sky and LinkedIn at pharmaphorum. That's all for now. Thank you for listening.